Desert, swamp, moor, forest. Nature offers a dazzling array of landscapes. To understand where this wealth of diversity comes from, we must delve a few meters underground into what we commonly call the soil. We have explored the planet so thoroughly that we think we know everything that exists right below our feet. We know less than 10% of the organisms that populate the underground world, and that, each in their own way, take an active part in creating the soil. We're just beginning to discover that plants form partnerships and create complex unions. Welcome to this subtle, surprising, and secret world. Let us begin our journey at the threshold, where the realms of air and earth meet, on the surface of the ground. Here in this border zone, nature recycles what it has produced. Leaves from trees and plant debris form what we call litter. In other words, the thin layer of organic detritus that covers the ground. Jean-François Ponge is a researcher at the Museum of Natural History in Paris. As an expert in soil life, when he walks through the forest, he sees things an ordinary hiker would barely notice.
For a leaf to decompose, it needs enough time for microorganisms to inhabit and use it, and for animals to transform it. That can take between 1 and 10 years or more, depending on how rich the soil is and also on the climate.
The plant debris of the litter is not consumed as it is by the creatures of the underworld. It must be refined, in other words, prepared, in order to make satisfactory food for underground life forms. The crucial element in the transformation of litter is a fungus, which is all but invisible, except to Jean-François Ponge's eyes.
Here's a beech leaf that's undergone the initial stages of transformation. What do we see on it? Different colored zones, brown zones that are the same color as the leaves still on the tree, and much lighter zones. This is the result of certain fungi we call white rot, which can break down tannins. This is important because tannins make the leaves inedible for animals. The entire zone that's been colonized by white rot is being turned into a sort of lace. It's the result of all those tiny creatures munching.
Once the fungus has done its work, the litter can then be eaten by most soil creatures. No larger than a grain of rice, surface-dwelling springtails are partially responsible for changing leaves into lace. Smaller yet, mites are the most numerous. They play their own part in the decomposition of leaves and other organic waste. Woodlice and millipedes are veterans of recycling and have been attacking organic matter for millions of years. By feeding on everything that has died, plants, fruit, animals, and insects, the creatures that decompose and recycle rid nature of its waste. They clean it. Fly larvae, laid in the bodies of dead animals, hatch and devour the rotting flesh. Ants carry organic detritus away, and beetles take care of the excrement that larger animals, both wild and domesticated, leave behind. The remains of organic matter form humus, a highly fertile compost found just below the litter. The layer of humus is about 30 centimeters thick. This is where most of the soil's biological and chemical physical processes originate and develop. How can life thrive in an environment with no light and little oxygen?
There are several thousand individuals in a clump of dirt about this size, like what I'm holding here in my hands. Several hundred species coexist. How is this possible on such a tiny surface? There are actually two reasons. On the one hand, there's a quantity of organic matter contained in the soil. That's the fuel or food source for all these organisms. Secondly, there's the fact the soil is a three-dimensional realm with both surface and depth. In this infinitely fragmented world, there's a great many spaces that allow animals and microorganisms to live together without bothering each other or having to compete.
Pseudoscorpions, springtails, roundworms, mites. A multitude of living creatures coexist in a fragmented world of irregular shapes. The humus teems with living creatures that fill the space according to their size and mobility. The tiniest cross paths harmoniously with the largest. With each degree on the scale of observation, we discover an ever greater abundance of life, right down to bacteria. Among these minuscule creatures, one giant reigns supreme, the earthworm. It aerates the humus by burrowing tunnels. No sooner does the earthworm hatch from its egg than it begins burrowing. By adulthood, certain types of earthworms can bore up to 1 meter deep into the soil. How can a creature with such a soft body dig so easily and deeply?
Actually, the soft part is mainly water, liquid. But the liquid's divided into segments, and the earthworm is able to empty some segments and fill others. When the segments fill, it increases pressure, and that's what makes it possible for the worm to push the soil out of the way and move forward. It's a truly original feature in terms of soil life.
The earthworm secretes a mucus that acts as a lubricant and makes it easier for it to move through the soil. Yet how can it move forward when its ringed body seems to have no way of gripping? The worm's smooth appearance is just an illusion. Along its sides, retractable bristles allow it to grasp the soil and give it something to push off from. Out of sight, the earthworm works the soil relentlessly. There are 3 types of earthworms. Epigeics live on the surface in the litter. Endogeics live below ground and feed on soil. Anisics pass through the different layers of soil as they burrow vertically back and forth between the subsoil and the surface. For Anisics, everything happens at night. Leaves are their favorite food. They drag them underground to digest in peace. By burying leaves, they play a crucial role in the distribution of organic matter throughout the various layers of soil. Not only do earthworms enrich the soil, they also till it just as effectively as our most state-of-the-art farm equipment. They aerate it, they fertilize it, in some, they give it life. 1 hectare contains up to 250,000 earthworms. Several hundred tons of earth pass through their digestive tract each year. As it eats, the earthworm takes in minerals from the soil and combines them with the plants it ingests. Worm excrement, called castings, is a potent blend of fertilizer. On average, worm castings contain 4 times more nitrogen, 7 times more phosphorus, and 3 times more calcium than the surrounding soil. Thus, through their digestive action, earthworms make it possible for numerous plant species to re-emerge in fallow land.
Earthworms eat seeds up on the surface and blend them with the soil. Then they bury them to make up what we call the soil seed bank. As long as the seeds are in the soil, they can't sprout. However, the earthworm also comes up out of the soil and leaves its castings on the surface. Once they're in the light, the seeds inside can sprout. That's why there's so many plants on such a small surface of fallow land.
Long before man invented farming, sowing seeds in hopes of a greater harvest, earthworms had already tilled and retilled every centimeter of soil. They made it fertile and favorable for plants to grow and thrive. The humble, tireless engineer and technician that is the earthworm must stand up to pitiless predators. Above ground, earthworms are the main prey for some breeds of birds. And below ground, they fall victim to the biggest and strangest of all European insects, the mole cricket, which can grow as long as 10 centimeters. This creature, little known except to gardeners whose plots they wreak havoc in, lives almost exclusively underground. It gets its name from its grasshopper-like body and powerful front legs that can clear earth as well as any digger. The mole cricket can eat like a horse. It devours everything in its path: plant roots, bulbs, and, unfortunately, earthworms. And if it wasn't bad enough dealing with their natural enemies, earthworms now have a previously unknown and extremely unsettling predator to reckon with. The platyhelminthe, a flat worm from the other side of the globe that keeps expanding its territory. Jean-Louis Justin from the Museum of Natural History in Paris is one of the few scientists studying the spread of this unwelcome pest.
Over the past few years, we've witnessed a new predator appear in Europe and France. platyhelminth, or flatworm, which lives on the ground. It's mainly active at night, so to see it during the daytime, you have to look under rocks or pieces of wood.
Jean-Loup Justine is worried. In some regions, the proliferation of these carnivorous flatworms is starting to have a devastating impact on local earthworm populations. Platyhelminthes are a branch of the animal kingdom with marine origins. Some breeds emerged from the water and became land-dwelling in specific regions of the earth.
Flatworms manage to adapt to a land environment, mainly in countries such as Australia, New Zealand, in the south of South America, in other words, several spots in the south of the southern hemisphere. Recently, these creatures have been turning up in Europe and France. They didn't get here on their own. Most of the time, they've hitched along with the transport of plants and earth, like stowaways.
The invasive species is indigenous to South America. More specifically, our new predator most likely comes from southern Brazil. The world's only scientific study of the distribution of this type of flatworm was carried out in France. The study has shown that it's no coincidence these predators have colonized the Atlantic coast. Because they originate in humid tropical regions, they can't survive in dry climates. Though this flatworm has only been recorded in France for about 10 years, it has already become a threat to soil integrity.
It's not hard to understand that if earthworms disappear or drop in number, it will disrupt the soil and soil ecology. Here's a flatworm hiding under this rock to escape the heat of the sun. As you can see, it's a few centimeters long. We see its head moving here. The other end is its tail. You might think its mouth is up near its head, but it's not. The mouth of the flatworm is located under its body, in the middle, here, this light-colored part. A pharynx comes out of its mouth and envelops the earthworm and digests it from the outside.
When hunting, the flatworm glides along on a slimy mucus trail it excretes from its abdomen. To capture its prey, it presses close and wraps itself around it, immobilizing it and slowly devouring it with its abdominal mouth. The predator's victims are entirely dissolved by its gastric juices.
These flatworms are hermaphrodites, which means each individual is both male and female. It takes two hermaphrodites to make babies. Flatworms can reproduce very quickly, at about the age of 2 weeks. At that point, it makes an egg cocoon that contains between 5 and 10 little fully formed flatworms. So we can see how quickly they can invade an area. After just a couple of weeks, one flatworm has already produced about 10 offspring.
There is no effective way to fight against this flatworm. It is too recent in France to have any predators. With its rapid rate of reproduction and the fact there's currently nothing to keep it in check, the flatworm population is expanding faster and faster. In some regions, flatworms have decimated the earthworm population to such an extent that the soil has deteriorated.
This soil is flooded. That's what happens when the earth is impermeable and won't let rainwater through. The role of the earthworm is to make holes in the soil to allow rainwater to penetrate. In Great Britain, another type of flatworm has invaded the British Isles. It has diminished the earthworm population, there are fewer earthworms, and the soil is less permeable. And there are more and more flooded zones of this sort.
How far will these flatworms go? Will we see entire regions made sterile because these intruders have exterminated the local worm population? The earthworm's high fertility rate may allow it to survive the flatworm's appetite. Depending on the species, an earthworm lays between 3 and 100 cocoons per year. Each cocoon contains about 10 eggs. Consequently, an adult earthworm can produce between 30 and 1,000 offspring each year. Unfortunately, not all soils are favorable to the propagation of our exceptional ally, the earthworm. Each soil has specific properties that have been created and fostered throughout its formation and evolution. Soil is either rich or sterile, depending on whether or not it favors the development of the fauna that live and proliferate in its depths. The landscapes below ground are just as varied as those up above. Within the space of a kilometer, they tell completely different stories to this soil expert, pedologist Bernard Jabiol.
With a given topography, given climate, given life conditions, given period of evolution, all those things together mean that soil is going to vary greatly from one spot to the next. Sometimes there's an evolution within the space of about 10 meters. Sometimes we see very visible evolutions within the space of several hundred kilometers. But on the global scale, we find a great diversity of soils, and therefore a great diversity of properties belonging to them.
Bernard Jabiol leaves his study pit in the forest to walk 800 meters over to one of his colleagues' pits in a field of grain.
Look at you, Joel. Your pit's really deep. Less than a kilometer away up there, I was in the forest and there were only 50 centimeters. Why is it so thick here?
Earlier you were uphill on the slope, so the soil wasn't very thick and it was on limestone. Here we're downhill with very thick soil that's over 1.5 meters deep. Why? Because there was erosion up on the slope with an accumulation of deposits at the bottom of the valley. This soil has strong agricultural potential and good depth, which means large water reserves and large mineral reserves. Because there are no obstacles, roots can easily grow to depths of 1 or 1.5 meters. It's also healthy soil with strong biological activity and with earthworms that travel back and forth from the depths to the surface.
The soil's depth and structure determine its capacity to store water. For the animal life, a heavy rain is the equivalent of a tsunami. The water dissolves organic matter on the surface and washes it below as it trickles down the tunnels dug by earthworms. Once it reaches the impermeable layers, like certain clays, water accumulates and forms underground reservoirs. Bernard Jabioul and Joël Michelin have traveled about 20 kilometers away to visit a third pit, dug in an area with few trees. The soil here is very different from that in the previous pits.
The soil here resembles the cultivated soil we saw. The quality is very loose, it's easy to push into, yet at the same time, it's very deep.
But it's sandy soil.
Right, it's sedimentary. The sand was deposited by the sea several tens of millions of years ago, and that's what the soil is currently developing in. Sand has two major drawbacks. The first one is acidity. In other words, the absence of nutritional elements. What's more, this acidity is hostile to the activity of earthworms. They can't live here. So none of the organic matter provided by the vegetation gets mixed into the soil. It simply accumulates up on the surface. The second major drawback is that the water drains very quickly. The soil can't store water. It doesn't have any reserves. This soil is very dry in the summer. In conclusion, there are two major constraints for vegetation: acidity and dryness.
Nevertheless, these impoverished, dry, acidic soils in which no earthworm can survive are not completely sterile. Rustic plants adapted to harsh conditions grow on the surface. In the litter, we find springtails, roundworms, and other habitual decomposers. Luckily, there's bacteria in the dirt. With no earthworms around, this is what imparts a bit of fertility to the soil. Bacteria are composed of microorganisms that are invisible to the naked eye, but they replicate so quickly and multiply at such a pace that they wind up saturating the soil, be it fertile or poor. Because of their density, bacteria are also an essential element when it comes to soil dynamics. Lionel Rongard and his team from the National Institute of Agricultural Research, the INRA, take samples of bacteria contained in different soils to make up a sort of conservatory for microorganisms.
When you study microorganisms in soil, you generally look at the first 20 centimeters, which correspond more or less to the height of the auger, since the superficial layer of soil actually contains the most and greatest diversity of microbial organisms. For example, in 1 gram of soil, which is a tiny amount, you have over 1 billion bacteria, and within this billion there are millions of different kinds. The reservoir of microbial diversity in the soil is found in this upper layer. To give you another example, if we look on the scale of a plot of land like this, sub-prairie, there is more living microbial mass under the ground than there is living mass above it, even if we include all the plant cover and add in livestock such as 10 cows per hectare or 50 sheep.
So it's no exaggeration to say that when conditions are favorable, there's as much life deep down in the soil as up on the surface. The sample taken by Lionel Rongard's team is examined under an electronic microscope. It reveals how bacteria are organized within their habitat. Thinner than a hair's breadth, the bacteria lodge in the tiny interstices of bits of earth. These spaces are so restricted that their predators, the bulky protozoa, are too big to get in. Sheltered away, the bacteria shift into a slow-motion lifestyle that allows them to conserve energy. Earthworms, if there are any present in the soil, can shake them from their torpor as they pass by. The mucus secreted by the worms and the oxygen they convey through their tunnels stimulate the bacteria. Active once more, the bacteria transform organic matter into the mineral salts that are indispensable for plant growth.
Bacteria are able to break down and mineralize the organic matter that finds its way into the soil, to transform it into mineral matter, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, etc. This mineral matter is what provides nutrition for the plants. So bacteria are deeply implicated in soil fertility.
To assess the impact of bacteria on soil fertility, the INRA has built a completely automated experimental platform. Plant development is measured under highly controlled conditions. Lionel Rongeard's team grow flats of alfalfa in pots of soil where the number and diversity of bacteria are controlled and measured.
After 6 weeks of cultivation, we see the alfalfa in normal soil has grown well, but its growth is much slower in the soil where the diversity of bacteria has been reduced.
What about these two pots where the alfalfa seems more developed than in the two preceding pots?
It's exactly the same experiment, except here the plants had been sprayed with fertilizer, so we see increased growth linked to that. And despite the addition of fertilizer, we continue to see a major difference in growth, with a plant that grows less when there are fewer kinds of bacteria.
The experiment shows that bacteria have a crucial influence on soil fertility. The more bacteria soil contains, the more fertile it is, whether or not fertilizer is added. The scientists also note an important correlation. Soil fertility differs according to the type of bacteria present.
Each soil contains a sort of genetic image of its microbial diversity and abundance, an image of its bacterial diversity. Why? Because bacterial diversity depends on the type of soil, its chemical physics, climate, as well as its historical use, whether it was agricultural, forest, or urban. Each soil has a unique image in terms of microbiology.
In a way, the microorganisms present in a given soil give it its identity. Currently, the INRA team has genetically identified and analyzed over 10,000 samples. These samples are kept on file. Each will be used as reference to understand the evolution of soil over time. We're a long way from a complete inventory of the interactions between bacteria and plants. For example, we've discovered that partnerships between plants and bacteria are forged at the root level.
We have 3 experimental systems that let us observe the root development of 3 different plants: clover, pea, and rapeseed. We see root architectures or developments that differ greatly from plant to plant, depending on density as well as their ability to grow deep. If we look more closely at the roots of the pea and clover, which are legumes, we see little bulbs on the roots called nodules. These nodules contain thousands of bacteria of the same strain, Rhizobia. The plant raises the bacteria by nourishing them with sap, and in exchange, the bacteria fix nitrogen from the atmosphere to make it easy to assimilate directly by the plant. We have a symbiotic relationship where each partner maintains a beneficial rapport with the other, which increases the biological fertility of the soil for plant development.
I give you what you don't have, and you bring me what I lack. Bacteria and roots enjoy a give-and-take relationship where each feeds the other for their own benefit. Let's continue our journey, delving even deeper underground as we follow along the roots. We know roots serve to anchor plants in the soil, and that the underground network they create stabilizes the land. The more they develop, the more they expand in diameter, and the more they compact the soil. Roots also draw the nutrients that the plant needs from the soil. These exchanges either acidify the soil or, on the contrary, alkalize it. Roots, therefore, have a direct influence not on the nature of the soil, but on its quality. Plant roots can reach dimensions we hardly imagine. Some trees that have adapted to drought, such as the eucalyptus, arouse the interest of researchers. Christophe Jourdan, from the Agricultural Research Center for International Development, the CIRAD, has turned a Brazilian plantation of eucalyptus into an open-air laboratory. He's interested in the specificity of roots depending on the layer of soil they grow in.
Last century, botanists would describe the upper parts of plants and just slightly the roots. It's always been the neglected zone in plant studies. It's true that more recent studies have attempted to go further in root physiology and mortality, in particular deep down. We now expect to find a different way of functioning and different microorganisms.
Roots have different shapes and different diameters, and not all of them have the same function. The architecture of a tree's root system is complex.
Most people think of roots as big roots that are directly attached to trees, like this one we see in the ground. Actually, these roots bear smaller roots, medium-sized roots, and at the end of those are fine roots. These are the roots in direct contact with the soil that absorb water and mineral elements. We're particularly interested in these fine roots, how they function, and their lifespan at different levels and different depths in the soil.
Christophe Jourdan mainly studies the life cycle of surface roots. He places a scanner about 50 centimeters below ground.
We scan the roots about once every 2 weeks. We take images from an entire year and compile them to get a picture and estimate of growth rate, which here is about 1 or 2 centimeters per day, and to calculate the lifespan of the roots, which here is about 8 to 10 months. When they die, these roots help produce root litter that gets injected into the ground at different depths.
Through their fine roots, which die and are constantly renewed, trees bring organic matter into the soil, just like earthworms that carry the leaves they feed on underground. Just how deep do the roots of eucalyptus trees, which are exposed to periods of drought, grow? Christophe Jourdan had a pit dug 20 meters deep, opening the doors to a little explored world.
We're about 15 meters underground here. There are lots of roots branched out behind the glass and even beside it. If we add the tree's height of 25 meters to the 15 meters below ground, that means these roots are 40 meters away from the crown of the trees. We were completely surprised by this. We did not expect to find roots this deep.
Deep roots are subject to strong pressure, so surely they are different from surface roots. Yet nothing about them looks special in any way. Although there is nothing visibly different on the outside, perhaps their internal structure will reveal distinctions. After selecting the best root samples, Christophe Jourdan makes very thin cross-sections of them. He then compares them with similar cross-sections of surface roots.
Here in this cross-section, we see the internal structure of the root sample collected out in the field. We see how the vessels that transport water take up a large amount of space. Most of the main part of the root is filled with these large vessels. When we compare this to a surface root, the vessels there are much smaller for the same diameter. What's more, the deep root does not have a perfectly cylindrical shape. We see how it's constrained by the ground and by the pressure exerted by it. The root had to deform in order to grow. These roots with special structure allow trees to seek water at great depths. This is especially useful in periods of drought and opens up very interesting perspectives for us, notably in terms of climate change.
One of the strategies developed by certain plants or tree species to increase their chances of survival consists of sinking roots, specialized in water transport as deep as possible. Over the course of evolution, a rather unsuspected ally has grown indispensable to the root systems of the majority of plants. Marc-André Selos, professor at the Paris Museum of Natural History, studies the role of fungi in soil dynamics. Mushrooms appear scattered, fragile, and ephemeral. But they're just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the secret reign of fungi, whose importance is largely unrecognized.
This part is what we commonly call a mushroom, but for biologists, it's just one part of the fungus. It's a reproductive organ that's actually connected to mycelium, which is much hardier and spreads across a much larger area inside the soil or in dead wood. This means that even if we don't see this part, called a fructification, mycelium is still present, and that is what actively contributes to the fungus's nutrition and to the biology and function of the soil.
The mycelium of some fungi create a network of filaments in the soil until they come in contact with roots. Over the course of evolution, the fungi-root union has basically become the norm because 90% of plant species are not autonomous. They need fungi to extract the phosphate and nitrogen they need from the environment they grow in. The details of the symbiotic relationship between fungi and roots can only be glimpsed through a microscope.
We see a lovely root with lots of lateral ramification that's been colonized by various fungi, black fungi, white fungi. The fungi form like a sock around the root branches. The root tends to be extremely ramified here, which increases the contact between fungus and roots. In the end, the fungus is just as present in the environment. Here the filaments are a little damaged, but it also explores the soil to find nutritive salts, mineral salts, and water for the plant.
The symbiosis between fungi and roots is called mycorrhiza. When mycelium establishes contact with a root, it weaves a sheath of filaments around it. Then penetrates the root and creates a network that molds the shape of the cells. There's another type of mycorrhiza that is more common than the preceding one. In this kind, mycelium penetrates directly inside the root cells. The plant increases its surface exploration of the soil 1,000-fold. And as for the fungus, it feeds on the sugars produced by the plant. Other fungi adopt a different strategy. Their mycelium seeks sustenance on the surface of the ground. A hearty and rigid food that they alone are able to digest.
Here's a piece of wood that is in the process of becoming incorporated into the soil. When we open it up, we see that the wood inside is completely decomposed. All that's left is this soft white substance, which was eaten, digested by the fungi. This white substance is called lignin, a component that represents almost half of this wood's mass and gives it its rigidity. Here, fungi play a decisive role because they are the only organisms able to digest lignin. No other organisms can do that. They are the only ones that can recycle it. What they leave behind is rich in cellulose that in turn will be eaten by other fungi, other animals, or bacteria. We can clearly see the fungi present here that form mycelium clustered into white threads.
Most fungi that seek food on the surface go for litter, which is much more tender than wood. The mycelium of these fungi is folded over onto itself into thousands of fine strands. So much so that each gram of litter contains several kilometers of filaments. This multiple ramification spreads over a large area, allowing the fungi to reach most of the dead leaves that fall off trees and plants. We've seen this fungus before, white rot. By digesting tannins, it makes leaves edible for the tiny animals living in the litter. Thus, the soil is generated by a great cycle that involves a multitude of elements. Over time, the joint action of animals, bacteria, roots, and fungi mark the soil with a succession of layers that can be seen when it's dug into. These strata allow pedologists to travel back in time to the origin of the soil. In other words, the bedrock.
This is a nice pit here. We're going to freshen it up a bit, and it will reveal, deep down, way at the bottom, something very hard. This rock is the departure point of what we call pedogenesis, the formation of soil. It was formed through the contact of this rock with the biosphere. We see a part of it here, the vegetation and roots, which act on the rock, as well as all the hidden life of the soil. Everything we don't see. Animals, microanimals, bacteria. All that is also going to create chemical reactions that gradually transform the rock over thousands and thousands of years. Tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years.
Born out of a long process that blends rock with organic detritus, soil, the thin skin of our planet, is fragile. We are just beginning to understand its extraordinary complexity. The interactions between plants and animal species are proving to be much greater than we'd imagined. We have only just begun to take stock of the relationships and exchanges that connect the elements that produce and create the soil. We still have a lot to discover to understand Mother Earth, who makes us what we are.